Water Basin Management Committee meeting for October 15, 2025. Take a roll call.
Director Cesena,
Here.
Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Reinecke,
Here.
Chair Zimmer,
Here.
all parties present.
Thank you. We'll move to item 3, Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, moving to item 4, board member comments. Do we have any comments from the board?
They'll get enough to say later.
Yeah. Exactly. All right, item 5, special presentations. We have none. We'll move to the item 6, the consent agenda. We have 3 items on consent. 2025 financial report, approval of proposed contingency reserve funding use, and approval of minutes from the October 2nd, 2025 special BMC meeting.
Thank you, Chair Zimmer. Yeah, so consent agenda, 3 items as you highlighted. Probably the one to mention is a second item, the allocation of the recommendation for allocation of reserves for BMC administration, facilitation, and legal counsel. I think as the board knows, it's been a busy year. We've had a lot of significant initiatives. We've had a lot of both BMC board meetings as well as a lot of coordination meetings with BMC parties, county planning, and other key stakeholders. And so the level of effort this year has exceeded, at least for the executive director services, our estimated budget. And so we have a request to fund out of reserves both the additional level of effort for executive director, but also legal counsel services.
I have a question. We're going to be probably using reserves for the rest of the year for additional funding for those efforts. Do we have, you think, enough to cover that where we're at? I saw it in the packet, but I just don't remember it off the top of my head. And at the time, I wasn't thinking about that.
Yeah, we think that there's sufficient reserves. I think Jamie will help me out. Yeah, so we have, with use, if approved, of reserves for these invoices, there would be $64,000 in reserves remaining.
Okay.
And then, and there's a slide. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah. That's
and
okay.
and then also we were looking at there'll be a small amount of reserves remaining from the LA 1416 modifications. I think somewhere around 3,000 that potentially could be utilized as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No other comments, public comment?
If you're in the boardroom and you would like to make a public comment, please come up to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand. We will take public comments in the boardroom first. It looks like there is no public comments in the boardroom, but there is one online. Jeff, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I wanted to comment on the increasing costs for the administration of this committee. We're now looking at increases both for admin and legal, not to mention the various consultants that are retained for various purposes. And just in looking at the warrant register, I think in round numbers, it's safe to say that we're paying Confluence and the Cleith Harris Group $250,000 a year. Confluence is at about 8, and Cleith Harris is about 12, give or take, $20K a month. $250,000, very close. Now we've got increased legal. And the idea that we're taking on all these significant initiatives and the extra staff time. And when you look at it all, it just boils down to a bunch of bureaucracy. We're pushing more paper around than we ever have before, and unnecessarily, in my view. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think this committee needs to take a hard look at every expense, at all of the components of the basin management, all the staff positions, and really evaluate the effectiveness, the efficacy of this committee and its support staff. I would submit to you respectfully that we're failing in that regard. We're not allocating the funds the way they need to be. We're not pursuing the initiatives that we should be pursuing. And it's just costs are out of control and they need to be reviewed. Thank you.
All right, there is no further public comment online, so we'll take it back to the board.
Okay, thank you.
I'll move approval of consent.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No,
Motion passes.
thank you. Okay, we'll move to item 7, public comments for items not appearing on the agenda.
If you are in the boardroom and you would like to make a public comment, please come up to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand and we will take public comment in the boardroom first.
Good afternoon, Patrick McGibney. This is Sustainability Group. One thing not on the agenda are any of the 5 action items Director Reinecke outlined back in June. None of them have been addressed since. A director clearly states that these issues are of utmost importance and they're ignored. Why? The last board meeting, Mr. Zimmer stated that these issues were being discussed during staff meetings. Well, please tell the community what's being done and put these on the agenda so the community can have a voice. One of these issues was financial equity throughout the basin. On page 307 of the Basin Plan, which Mr. Gibson and Zimmer helped write, it states, quote, to allocate cost equitably among all who benefit from the basin water resources, end of quote. During the last BMC meeting, it was suggested that all parties, private and ag users, contribute financially to the management of the basin. This would require metering and monitoring of all well users. As Mr. Gibson and Zimmer stated in the Basin Plan, and I quote, accurate data regarding groundwater production is necessary for the parties to assess basin water resources and implement the Basin Plan. The Basin Management Committee and parties will face significant challenges to successfully management of the basin without the collection and data from non-purveyors. In particular, with over 40% of basin production being based on estimates, it may not be possible to accurately predict or measure the effects of their actions to stop seawater intrusion using the basin yield metric and other metrics, such as the sustainable yield. Failure of this basin plan to stop seawater intrusion would harm the public interest in use of the basin as a sustainable source of water for all purposes, end of quote. It says accurate data here is necessary, not estimates. Mr. Gibson also added to the Basin Plan, and I quote, the county could adopt an ordinance requiring registration and groundwater wells and monitoring and reporting of groundwater production in the basin. The cost of implementing such a county ordinance is expected to be $150,000, including the purchase and installation of meters on all private, domestic, and agricultural wells in the basin. This is on page 137 of the Basin Plan. This would be part of that bold, decisive action that you, the BMC, have been asked to take. It flies in the face of what Mr. Gibson implied at the last BMC meeting when he pointed out that private well owners are not part of the adjudicated basin and have no obligation to participate or any route to get there. As it turns out, there is a route. It's in the Basin Plan. Let's take it. Thank you.
All right, there's no further public in the boardroom, but there are 2 public comments online. Jeff Edwards, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Thank you again. My name is Jeff Edwards, and kind of as a follow-up to my earlier remarks about the bureaucracy and the paper and pushing and so forth, I want to introduce Exhibit A. And that's the water recycling funding study. And I realize that this is part of the transient model development and the grant funding that was received. And this water recycling funding study, first of all, funding, I have a bit of a problem with that because we spent $200 million on a water recycling facility, and we're still struggling with what to do with the water. But I don't think any of the possibilities outlined in the water recycling funding study are viable options. And just to name a few, indirect potable reuse, or how about toilet to tap? That's a good one. That's going to be for Los Osos. It just, I would submit to you that we're not going to learn anything from this study. It references the state water pipeline intertie. Okay, that's a winner. I support that. But all of these other projects are just vehicles for staff to waste time. And they're doing it. So, and you're enabling staff to waste time is the bottom line. So I challenge this committee at this, well, we're over 10 years in basin management, and we have little to show for it. So I challenge this committee to not enable staff to waste time, to compel staff to work on the initiatives that will make a difference, not those that are going to be set on a shelf in a binder. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Becky McFarland, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Okay. Glad to be here from home. Sorry I can't be there in person. I enjoy talking with everybody when we're there. I agree with one of the former speakers talking about the equity of paying for taking care of our basin. When we have about a third of the town that's not hooked up to the sewer, and I don't think they have any kind of assessment that helps pay for the Basin Management Committee. Maybe that's somewhere a fund, there'd be more money for that. Also, yeah, let's figure out some things. It doesn't just have to be a pipeline. We've had the owner of Warden Lake that wants to try and work on something for collecting water that could go into the sewer there. And I know there's issues with that, but is that more expensive than building a supposedly 10 million, probably $20 million pipeline? So thank you.
All right, that was the last public comment, so we will take it back to the board.
We'll bring it back to the board. Any comments from board members? I just have a comment on some of the comments in that, the projects that we're talking about, I stand behind the fact that we have implemented quite a few projects, majority of what was in our outlined basin plan. And so we have made significant strides in completing those. We started the journey with a funding mechanism and decided that chasing that funding mechanism was going to be much more timely and less cost efficient than putting it towards projects. And so we've chosen to take that route, and we're successful in completing many of these projects. So just my take on it and my comment towards a lot of the infrastructure comments.
Wasn't that recycled water use study grant funded?
Yes, so the water recycling funding study, as we call it, is named after the grant funding program that provided the $200,000 in funding for the program. And I would just add that certain of the alternatives were prescribed by the State Water Resource Control Board. So there, to get the funding, we had to evaluate certain alternatives, and so.
Thank you.
Okay, no further comments. We'll close item 7. We'll move to item 8, the Los Osos Basin Update Report. Turn it over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Chair Zimmer. Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief as we've got a couple of significant items to come, but and a number of the updates relate to those items. So, but I did just want to highlight, the water recycling funding program grant and study. We've got a meeting with the state board on October 16th or tomorrow to review the current status of the project, and then we anticipate bringing a final draft report to the BMC for consideration here in November, and then completing that project and submitting it to the state by November 15th is our current target. So we'll, looking forward to wrapping up that study and that project. The community-based water quality grants, or what we've been, for the Sweet Springs well, we're continuing to work with the selected hydrogeo consultant to prepare the bid docs, and then to work with county environmental and county planning to get the necessary permit approvals to allow us to construct an additional monitoring well to help monitor the conditions within the basin. Sustainable yield, we're going to talk about a later item. And then the growth management ordinance, we're going to talk about a later item as well. And I did want to highlight something under the water recycling component of the Basin Update Report, and that was the ribbon cutting event yesterday for the recycled water connections at the community center, Monarch School, and Los Osos Middle School. It marks a significant milestone in putting that recycled water resource to use. I think estimates are that by connecting those facilities to the recycled water program, we can offset 35 acre-feet of lower aquifer purveyor pumping. And so that will help reduce our overall groundwater production here in Los Osos and improve our sustainability. And so thanks to County Public Works, and I'm sure many others that were involved in getting that project across the finish line. And so it was a nice event. And that, I guess one other update just for the Los Osos CSD Water Resiliency Intertype Project at the September 4th meeting, the board approved a design contract to allow that project to move forward. And that concludes the Basin Update Report.
All right, sounds good. I'll bring it back to the board. Any board member comments before we go to public comment? Hearing none, we'll move to public comment.
If you are in the boardroom and you'd like to make a public comment, please come up to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand and we will take any public comments in the boardroom first.
Thank you. Patrick McGinney with the Sustainability Group. Dan, I only have one objection to the report on there, and that's when you say that the gray water that's going into the different areas are going to help with sustainability. We do not have sustainability right now. So let's not put out that the basin is sustainable. We are trying to get sustainability, and that might help with our sustainability efforts. Thank you.
There are no further public comments in the boardroom, but there is one online. Jeff, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, Jeff Edwards, and I'm kind of referring to the update and specifically the wastewater and recycled water flows. That is the deployment of our treated effluent. And as many of you know, and this is in each of the reports, 80% of all the effluent, approximately 400 acre feet per year, is disposed at Broderson. And I posed the question about the transient model and whether or not it's telling us anything different about Broderson and whether it's working. And the Cleith Harris Group replied that the Broderson site is working. And it went on to detail that a little bit. But what I've gleaned from it is that what we're seeing is the mounding is not growing as it was before. So it's my belief that Cleith Harris Group is making an assumption that the water is pushing through the clay lens into zones D and E. And I don't know if we can conclude that. In fact, I don't think it is pushing through. The absence of a head that's mounding further doesn't demonstrate definitively where the water's going. I would submit we don't know where the water's going. And that's 80% of our annual yield from this wastewater facility. Don't we want to know where it's going for sure? And I don't think we do. And I may have missed it, but in the analysis, I haven't seen a discussion of the strand B of the Los Osos fault and how that may be playing a role in where the water is going from Broderson. So I would like to see a real analysis and be able to conclude definitively that the water is pushing through the clay lens as it was intended. Thank you.
There's no further public comment in the boardroom or online, so we'll take it back to the board.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. I don't know if we want to comment on the Broderson. I mean, I know we've talked about it in the past. I think it's something we do need to look at in this upcoming year. I don't know if we have it. We've talked a lot about it, and there is significant weight on Broderson. So maybe it's something we can bring back at a later part of the year.
Yeah, it might be more appropriate to have that discussion when we present the final draft of the water recycling funding study. One of the scenarios that was analyzed in that looked at trying to quantify the effectiveness of the Broderson discharge. So that'd probably be a good time to get into that.
Yep, thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comments. We'll move to item 9. We have 2 action items, the sustainable yield estimate for calendar year 2025 and the draft Los Osos Basin Management Committee 2025 or 2026 growth rate recommendation letter. We'll start with action item 9A, sustainable yield estimate.
Thank you, Chair Zimmer. Yeah, so this is a continuation. Well, continuation is not the right term, but it's a continued discussion of the sustainable yield item that we had at our last meeting. At that meeting, we introduced a proposed application of the adaptive methodology utilizing the transient model for calculating the sustainable yield and an initial sustainable yield value. And now we're bringing back an updated value based on input from the board on that approach for the board's adoption consideration. And I'll do a brief background, provide the updated results and how we got there, and then I'll turn it back over to the board. But sustainable yield is the maximum amount of groundwater is defined in the basin plan as the maximum amount of groundwater that can be extracted in a given year without causing seawater intrusion to intrude further. inland and no active well producing chlorides greater than 250 milligrams per liter. So that's sort of our guidance when we're, calculating sustainable yield. I just have the history here, sustainable yield. We went through this last time, but initially set at 2,400 in the Basin plan, was updated to 2,450 in 2016, later updated to 2,760 in 2017, where it held through the 2019 annual report. In 2021, during the consideration of the 2020 annual report, which again included a sustainable yield estimate of 2760, the BMC approved the submittal of that report, but directed staff to conduct a detailed review of the sustainable yield estimate and to bring back updated recommendations. And so I think, many of you may remember on October 21st of 2021, we had a lengthy discussion around sustainable yield. That's where we presented the adaptive method as that incorporated new constraints and approaches to calculating sustainable yield. And then ultimately the BMC unanimously approved the sustainable yield of 2,380 acre feet, which is where we sit today, utilizing that new approach. And so that value, 2,380 acre feet, then held for the calendar year 2023, 2024, and 2025 annual reports, and is the current sustainable yield that the BMC identified for this year. However, as the board knows, we've been working on a significant modeling initiative to develop a new groundwater model, the transient model, that's been funded through the Water Recycling Funding Study. That model has undergone peer review through two separate hydrogeology firms, GSI and Linker, and we've received presentations on those peer reviews at meetings in May and June. At our June meeting, we received the model construction and calibration and baseline scenario TMs. And then at our more recent August meeting, we received a presentation on those technical memorandums. And so, as I mentioned, we presented at our October 2nd meeting an updated sustainable yield calculation utilizing the adaptive method and the new groundwater model, the transient model, that estimated 2,020 acre feet per year could be pumped from the basin using existing infrastructure over a 50-year period. The board reviewed that information and provided input to the purveyors to coordinate with BMC staff and Cleeth Harris geologists to discuss the potential operational requirements and the feasibility of achieving the optimized pumping distribution that was included in that sustainable yield estimate. And so that was, 2 weeks ago when we were here. So we have been working diligently with the purveyors and with Cleeth Harris geologists to evaluate the pumping distributions included in the sustainable yield estimates. We've made modifications to those pumping distributions based on input from the purveyors and have developed an updated sustainable yield estimate for the board's consideration of 2,000 acre feet per year, or a reduction of 20 acre feet from what was presented on October 2nd. And this sustainable yield estimate is, again, it's utilizing the transient model, the adaptive method, and is an estimate of the amount of water that could be extracted without exceeding the criteria over a 50-year period. The table on the right shows just the distribution of production, recycled water use within the basin associated with this scenario. And then there was a methodology change incorporated into this calculation that differs from the previous calculation presented on October 2nd. It incorporates a 5-year period to allow the purveyors time to modify their operations to match the pumping distribution that is incorporated within this sustainable yield estimate. And again, we've had multiple conversations with purveyors and their operations staff that to ensure that they believe that the pumping distribution is potentially achievable and that something that the purveyors can work towards. But we wanted to choose a conservative time period just to make sure that there would be sufficient time to work towards that optimized distribution of pumping. And that ultimately that lowers the sustainable yield estimate. And that's why we see the reduction from 2020 to 2000 in the current recommendation. And these are just the figures from the technical memorandum, again, showing the modeled extent of the 250 milligram per liter chloride isopleth relative to the threshold line that was established in the adaptive method, outlining the furthest extent of seawater intrusion that we had experienced as of 2021, and that the modeling of this scenario doesn't indicate that the seawater intrusion front would exceed that threshold. And we have figures both from zone D and zone E. And so our recommendation is that the board receive the information on the updated sustainable yield calculation and consider approval of the proposed sustainable yield estimate of 2,000 acre feet per year for calendar year 2026, or to provide alternate direction to staff. And that concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you, Dan. Bring it back to the board member comments. Any questions, comments on this item?
I do have a few questions, but they would maybe be for Spencer, so I don't know if we can have him answer any questions before public comment.
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. Well, Spencer's making his way up here. Just generally, I wanted to highlight how much effort was put in these last 2 weeks after our last meeting that Dan mentioned, but there was a lot of meetings. I think there was, was there 3 staff meetings? And then the back and forth between Spencer redefining the optimized pumping and coming back to the purveyors for confirmation. It was a hot topic, I'm sure, for all of us. I know I was involved in a lot of the comments from my staff and confirming, working with our operations group. So just want to just really highlight that, how much effort was put into getting here today in a timely fashion.
Yeah, I would like to thank Spencer as well. He's
Yeah.
put in a lot of time on this and definitely appreciated. So one of my questions is related to table 2. It's the mass balance for the basin. I'm curious if that under the source it says GHB, it's the very first line. It says 108 acre feet. Is that how much seawater would come in based on this distribution over the next 50 years?
That's correct. So it's the average that mass balance is taken for the final 45 years, because the first 5 years were under the current condition. So that was a run as a separate 5-year run, and then followed by 45 years of this optimized distribution. So the table 2 is an average from the 45 years. But in response to your question about the GHB, so there's 2 general head boundaries, one at the coast and then one on the interface between the subbasin and in the Warden Lake area, between what would be a Los Osos area subbasin and the Warden Creek subbasin, which are DWR terms. But so it's outflow. So there's inflow on the general head boundary, and then there's outflow. At the coast, there's both inflow and outflow. At the Warden Lake interface, there's just outflow from Los Osos Basin. And so the inflow and outflow values that are listed there for seawater intrusion, I think the 108, if you Do you have table 2, Dan?
Working on it.
Okay, well, that's fine. Anyway, it represents intrusion
Okay.
along that where it says seawater intrusion, that is inflow. Right.
Okay, that was fundamentally my question. So I guess I just want to clarify that even though we're, we're striving to prevent seawater intrusion, even under these conditions with this distribution, 108 acre feet of seawater could potentially intrude into the basin.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. No other board comments at this time. We'll go ahead and open it to public comment.
If you have a public comment and you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand. We will take our public comments in the boardroom first.
Hi, Lynette Brooks. A couple of comments. Number one, this 2000 was very encouraging when I saw that in the report. I'm a little concerned hearing what Mr. Harris just said, that his model is 5 years of the current pumping. So maybe right now that sustainable yield number still needs to be below the current pumping, because we know from his baseline model that the current pumping is not sustainable. And then it sounded like after that, when you guys have time to get optimized, then it could be the 2,000 acre feet per year. Mainly, I just want to encourage you to vote for this today. We know that the old number was wrong. Just the data kept indicating that saltwater was intruding. We can't let that number stand. That has to be changed. I don't know how the whole politics with boards and everything works, but if for some reason you can't vote today because boards haven't met or however this whole thing goes, then you need to get that done. And if it takes another special meeting or something, but this vote needs to be done and the sustainable yield reduced to 2,000 at the maximum to keep saltwater from intruding. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Julie Macedon, and I'm the president of S&T Mutual Water Company. And I just wanted to make a couple comments. I've already talked to Dan about this a little bit, but I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the other board members. You know, the meeting on 10/2, that was only 9 working days ago. I know we're saying 2 weeks, but it was only 9 working days. 7 days later, the sustainable yield was updated based on our purveyor feedback, and that was Friday, 10/10. That's only 2 working days before this meeting. We are not able to bring this information to our board. They have not received any of this information. And I would just ask that the BMC meet like the last week of October or after even the CSD meeting on 11/6, because I don't think it's come before the CSD board. Beth is representing us, and right now she's not, because the board doesn't know what's going on. I think there's still time. I know that timelines are important. I think there's still time to review the information, vote on it. We're not arguing about the number necessarily. It's more of a process thing for me because I'm the president and I'm supposed to, let people know what's going on. And I think there's still time that we can get this information in the letter to the county supervisors for the 11/18 meeting or the December 9th or December 16th meeting that the county supervisors is having. So that's all I want to say. I'm not even sure if it's legal for Beth to vote for us without having board direction. So there's that. Okay, thanks.
Patrick McGibney. The transient model showed the past 5 years extraction rate of 1830 acre feet yearly increased the overdraft of our basin and allowed seawater to intrude further inland. But during that time, the county hailed the lowering of the basin yield metric to 71%, creating extra water and allowing more growth with no pushback from the BMC. The transient model is now showing that the basin yield metric should have been 91% during that time, not the 71%. The county also skewed the 2024 basin yield metric to 69%, again, with no pushback from the Basin Management Committee. Using these fouled metrics, the county has also convinced the Coastal Commission to accept their updated local coastal program and growth management ordinance, opening up our water basin to more growth and use. Again, no pushback from the BMC, all based on a history of approving sustainable yields that weren't sustainable. It looks like you're headed in that direction again. The transient model is telling you that the extraction rate of 1830 acre-feet yearly is too much. The 2026 sustainable yield must be below that. Why? Because over the years, the production rate has exceeded the sustainable yields metric with a 20% buffer, enhancing the overdraft of the basin. If you approve the sustainable yield at 2,000 acre-feet yearly and hit that 91% basin yield metric again, you're overdrafting the basin. The transient model doesn't tell you how much is actually safe to extract. It only tells you what a safe sustainable yield would be if a 20% buffer was always maintained. The transient model also estimated a sustainable yield of 2020 acre-feet yearly would also be safe if the purveyors optimized distribution of pumping utilizing existing infrastructure. But the purveyors have indicated it would take at least 5 years to implement such pumping. So what data supports the estimate of 2,000 acre-feet? What would suffice? Where did that come from? If in 5 years of optimized pumping, more water has actually been produced, then raise the sustainable yield to 2,000 acre-feet or whatever the transient model is indicating. But wait until data shows it works. Right now, you know 1830 acre-feet is too much. A safe start for the sustainable yield might be 1,800 acre-feet yearly. The precautionary approach is what is called for here now. Anything less puts the basin in extreme jeopardy. Be safe, be smart. Thank you.
Richard Mark. So on. Richard Marginson. I think we know how this is going to go. The little curveball that was just thrown in there with S&T. If that happens to be the case, then I would encourage them to hold a special meeting as soon as possible. If that's going to hold this up, I think the purveyors are on board with this. I think the naysayer in the room is going to be the county. And with respect to that, the purveyors are the ones that are managing this basin. The purveyors are the ones that have funded the projects. The purveyors are the ones that have done the studies. I can't remember the last time that the counties participated in a water project in Los Osos. They did the wastewater project, but a water project? You just turned on recycle water. That was in the original timeline for the wastewater project to happen within a couple years. What are we going on now? Is this the 10th year? And they finally had a ribbon cutting? I don't believe the county has the right. They have the right to sit on this board, but I don't think they have the right to override the consensus of the purveyors when this is your basin and you're managing it and you're paying for it. Unless they want to start coming up with money from the budget to make all these things happen that will allow growth, but they don't have it. We already heard they can't. They don't have any money for Sunnyside. This is your basin. This is Los Osos' basin. It's not the county's basin. And for Mr. Gibson to hold this up, because now all of a sudden there's all kinds of problems with this model that were never brought up with the steady state model, because that gave them a number that could open up growth. You guys need to take a stand on this.
It looks like there's no further public comment in the boardroom, but there are two online. Jeff Edwards, all you have to do is unmute.
Hello, my name is Jeff Edwards, and I have to say I'm a little bit confused. All this discussion about the safe yield and the basin yield metric and the concerns over the backdrop, which is growth, principally residential growth in Los Osos. I seldom hear a discussion about the fact that the county of San Luis Obispo has a water neutral policy for Los Osos. It's carried out vis-a-vis Title 19, as most of you know, requires a 2-to-1 measure of conservation to expected demand. Growth saves water. The demand as growth occurs will go down. It's something I don't know how it's so difficult to comprehend that by most of these folks, you folks and the commenters. Residential growth saves water. And the idea that we should modify the safe field at all is contrary to my thinking. And then the latest modification of 20 acre feet appears to be a number pulled out of thin air, arbitrary and capricious. And I guess it's not really a coincidence in my view that if you run the math of demand over safe yield at 2020 acre feet per year, you get a basin yield metric of 83.66, which is below the zero threshold, no growth, at 84. And magically, by adding 20 acre feet, or sorry, subtracting 20 acre feet from the safe field, we now get a basin yield metric of 84.5. I don't believe in coincidences. There's no urgency to sending a letter to the county. There's not even a requirement to establish a new basin yield metric. And I would suggest that this committee take a deeper dive and do the analysis that is required to make such a significant step. We have reduced the sustainable yield by over 25% in less than 4 years. And I don't believe it's supportable. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Becky McFarland, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Okay. We pumped less than 2,000 acre feet last year and still had increased chloride levels. You know, how in the world would pumping more than that make anything better? I say no to 5 years of too much pumping. Cut the sustainable yield now and then let them prove that they can actually do that. And so that they can prove that they can do what they say they're going to do. The data shows that we've been increasing our chlorides, and I'm glad that there have been staff efforts, but again, the result is not good. It's still over pumping. And I realize that this sustainable yield is lower than last year. And that would be a reason to vote for it because we want it to be less than it was, but it's not fixing it. And as to adding building to save water, I will remind everyone again, guest houses are not required to retrofit to build. And there's no limit to the number of these 2-bedroom, 1-bath homes that are being added. And they are not included in the growth management ordinance. And it doesn't seem like anybody else here ever brings that up, other than we know one of the developers just said he's told us that he's building 2 of them right now. That's completely left out. Also, I'm sorry, did I say they're not required to retrofit to build? So they are not saving water. Also, outdoor use is not required to be retrofitted. So I'm so torn on this. I want there to be less, a smaller yield, but it's still not small enough. We have increased chlorides. And if you give them 5 more years pumping at a higher level, we're going to have even more. So please do the right thing. Thank you.
All right, there's no further public comments, so we'll bring it back to the board.
Okay, thank you. All right, further board discussion? Any further discussion?
I think first we start by clarifying the mistaken notion that if we set a sustainable yield of 2,000 acre feet, we're going to pump 2,000 acre feet. I
Right.
mean, that there's no correlation between setting that number and what we actually use. That's up to the individual citizens. And yes, we were way under that last year. But yeah, just make sure those numbers, you don't make that simple assumption. I guess where I'm confused is the 1830 versus the 2000. And I understand, I guess it's changing the pumping that we do that's going to allow that to happen. And I know that we have 2 wells, one brand new and one fairly new that we're going to be leaning on harder for Zone D next year. That's part of this whole discussion, I guess, that's happened over the past 10 days. Oh, and back to S&T, how quickly could emergency board meeting happen there? Because I don't want to put this off until November, December. We need to move on this. Okay.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I mean, Mr. Sesania brings up the relevant point. This is not talking about increasing pumping in the current manner. It's talking about changing where that pumping occurs and the impacts of pumping 1,830 acre feet per year out change depending on where you extract it. And that's been discussed for years and years and years. Going higher in elevation and further east, it can extract more water without without undue effect. So that's not what's here. What I am curious about, though, is whether there are members of this committee sitting here today that aren't prepared to vote on it, on the question of sustainable yield. And if that's the case, then I don't think that we have a lot more we need to discuss at this point. I come prepared to issue an opinion, but I don't know what others think.
I'm ready to vote. But I don't want to put S&T in a spot where they're uncomfortable moving this ahead. And that's where I guess I'd like to know, 10/23, that's your next board meeting?
I think, yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into this vote. And I think the consensus, at least amongst the purveyors and the science and all the peer reviewers, is that we have to lower the number. I think there's no question with that. And I also understand there's probably some compromise embedded into the 2000 as far as, realistic goals and all of that. I think maybe if because I don't think we're going to get it lower. So I think that as far as S&T is concerned, if the idea is to mull it over and, say it should be 1,830, or I don't know what their intention or what their goals would be, because they haven't met yet. I think that, we're not going to probably go lower than 2,000. I don't think that's probably going to happen this year. And so the president is here now, and if she, I think that I can move forward with the vote if it's okay if the board was to confer with her and decide, if she was to decide in this situation, that would be okay, I guess. But again, it's really not up to me. So
Okay. Can you confirm that, or do you want to come up to the podium and?
Hi guys, sorry. I guess we read the room wrong. We thought there was going to be a lot of public pushback on the 2000 number, and so I do think after hearing what the feedback from the board members, and I think that Beth and I will take one for the team, and Anne is here, another board member, and I think it's okay. Okay.
Okay,
Sorry.
good. It's good to hear. Thank you. Yeah.
Because didn't we just recently schedule another meeting to get the recycled study back to the state? And I don't remember the date of that meeting.
Yeah, we haven't officially noticed it, but we are tentatively planning a meeting for November 12th. The work study is due on the 15th.
I'm thinking about how that fits into the county's time frame and when they consider the growth management ordinance. Because I want the letter to them by the time that's first looked at.
So in our conversations with county planning, and I think we talked about this at the last board meeting, they had requested, I think, a letter by November 6th. So that they have to prepare their own staff report and recommendation to the board of supervisors.
I could just weigh in on that, Mr. Sesania, the finalization of that water recycling study report is not germane to the decision on the growth management ordinance.
Oh, right. I was just thinking we could add an extra agenda item for that meeting if we didn't vote today. That's all.
It sounds.
But if we're ready to vote,
sounds like we're gonna do
yeah,
that.
I don't see any, I mean, it's been a lot of work put in on this. And I am not about to distrust my consultant at this point. I don't know how thick the clay lenses are out there under Broderson, and I'm not about to try and, okay.
Well, some places they're more like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I generally think this approach is a step in the right direction, not necessarily because we're lowering the sustainable yield, but ultimately I look at our monitoring report and the data that's coming out of there and the results of the modeling, and it just seems like it's making more sense to me, that we're more in line. We bring this before the board every year. So this isn't a final decision by any means. This is, we have a new model. We have a lot of new information in front of us. We're processing it, and we're taking the best data that we have available, the best analysis of this modeling. And to me, it seemed like it fell in line. We talked about this optimized pumping. We had some discussion on that last meeting. We've talked about that even further, and building in that 5-year, I think, is a conservative approach that really gives us that opportunity to maximize the pumping. There's things that we can start out doing tomorrow, and then there's other things that are going to take more time. And some of those things, you have to fund, you have to build, you have to do, are more significant than others. But the fact is that we're all here to make the basin better and to stop as much seawater intrusion. We've always had the intention of optimizing our pumping. We have better direction now. We have more information now. I just think it's a great approach that we've had here in developing this, and the amount of work that went into this. Although it was a very short time, I think we all saw it coming. So ultimately, yeah, I'm prepared to vote too.
One additional comment, Golden State's looking at a new well as part of the infrastructure improvements in these operational, the 5-year period. It took us 5 years,
Yeah.
I believe, to develop our last well. And so it's not simple. And how things change along the way, this new model. I hope I'm not sharing information that I should, I don't think so, but this new model has informed us that the well that we just drilled at Bay Oaks, which tapped into Zone E, we're going to have to block that off in Zone E because the effect on saltwater intrusion is too serious. So it's something that can be reversed if the situation gets better in Zone E. It's a temporary plug, but that's came about since we started developing that well. So this is new information. It's good information. We have to go with it.
Yeah, and so we have been looking at a new well, replacement well, putting that on our horizon and forecast. It really started well before this analysis of the 5-year projection. So, knowing the age of our wells and where they're located, prior to this optimization, we talked a lot about Rosina well too. And so now, our other well, Cabrillo well, is one that we've talked a lot about in our optimization. And so there are changes that we can make with both of those wells. And in addition to some of our other wells, we have a blending plan at one of our newer wells that is tied to tank capacity and things like that. So a lot of moving parts, but we did meet after our last meeting, kind of talked about those a little bit, and there are some significant changes we can make right out of the gates. Some of the others, if we put maybe a VFD on Cabrillo or something, that'll give us more control. We did just update the SCADA system on Cabrillo in the last year and a half or so, and so that gives us some controls that we can potentially start and stop that well at a more close interval than we have in the past, and may avoid some of the concerns that I had when I originally thought about it. So, like I said, we left that meeting last time, significant thought and effort into this, and think that pumping, it made sense for us. We thought it was a good conservative approach, knowing that we're going to continue to monitor and we're going to continue to maybe some of these things that we think we can do, we can't do. And we come back next year and we talk about that, and we change the sustainable yield based on those facts too. This is making the decision today based on the best information and our commitment to what's the information that's been provided to us. Yeah.
So I guess, I think we are kind of changing the method with which we are setting sustainable yield here. And I think we're changing it significantly enough that it's probably a good idea for us to have that outlined in as much detail as possible because, we have the perspective part of what we're doing, and then we have the current part of what we're doing. I think just for our own sake and to make sure that we're staying on a clear path, since that's what we're doing is changing distributions and that kind of thing. I think just the more detail, the better into how we're doing this, just like we would, establish the sustainable yield with certain calculations. What are those numbers going into this, and what are we changing year to year? Because for next year, if we're doing this and we're using this method, but our chloride numbers are going up or something like that is happening, I think we need a solid foundation to fall back onto as to why we're selecting this method, and also for future adjustments that may need to be made to the way we're doing it to ensure that we're staying as protective as we need to be when it comes to setting sustainable yield.
So let me see if I understand correctly, you're talking about the methodology for sustainable yield. I don't see that as changing as much as I think what you were kind of pointing to is more of our optimized pumping, trying to define that better, or was it because we've always used our demand and our monitoring report and our modeling effort as setting the sustainable, and I don't see any of that change. We have a new model, but we're still using the same methodology. So is it?
Well, I think what I'm talking about is we have the 50-year, the time that we're looking at is 50
Oh.
years now. We have 5 years of a certain type of pumping, and then after that, 45 years of a different type. And so I just want to make sure that if we're using numbers like that and plugging it into a mathematical equation or, deriving our sustainable yield in that way. I just think we need to make sure that it's pretty set in stone that we're doing it that way. Because next year, if we need to make an adjustment and we're comparing it to this year, we need to know what change needs to be made, I guess is my point there.
Mr. Chairman, it seems that that's well described in the tech memo that's put out here as to how you're doing it.
That's what I thought. Spencer's memo, I thought, did a pretty good job of
Yeah.
kind of running through that.
And I don't know if Ms. Reineke had any more comments, but I can offer my own. First of all, I really appreciate the effort that was put out over the course of the last, whatever it is, 9 days. Especially because I think I was the one that prodded that effort to be done in time for today. So I'm very, very grateful for that. Let me preface the rest of my comments by saying all my comments, previous comments about the nature of the calibration of the transient model as regards chloride, the resultant uncertainty that is unknown, the resultant sensitivity to production numbers that is unknown still stand. And the county is working with Todd Groundwater on the, what do we call, predictive uncertainty analysis that is essential to understanding, to increasing our understanding of how this model works. That said, so just to have those on the record, that said, I very much like the conceptual change in the conceptual framework, this opening it up to consider appropriate time frame of 50 years and employing the adaptive management technique that we officially adopted some years ago. So I think the approach is solid in that. I am supportive of changing the sustainable yield to 2,000, but with that, I would make two requests, basically, then they are related. First of all, realizing that it's only 9 days since we started the analysis of the potential redistribution, I think it's important for this committee and the public to have a detailed work plan on what needs to be done to accomplish the redistribution. What, as you referenced, Mr. Chairman, there's things that can be done today. What are the things that are going to take a week? What are the things that are going to take longer than that? And to be honest, as I first looked at the proposal, I thought that a 5-year timeframe to accomplish the redistribution seemed unduly long. I will reserve judgment on that until I see that work plan. I've not been privy to any of the details, not being a water purveyor, but I'd very much like to see that. And I would hope that by the end of the year or early next, we could get that in front of this committee and the public. That's a matter of holding ourselves accountable for making progress toward doing what is low-hanging fruit here, which is redistributing. Yes, I understand there are bigger issues. I also understand from casual conversation that there are known unknowns. I do often quote Donald Rumsfeld, but there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns. The known unknowns regarding your Cabrillo well and so forth like that. I'd be interested in what is the most aggressive timeline in resolving the unknowns at this point so we can make this. But if that does take 5 years, that does take 5 years. This transient model with all my qualifications to it suggests that in the longer term that could be accommodated if it needed to be. I would certainly hope that we could do this much more quickly than that. And related to that, adopting this approach, the adaptive approach to determining our sustainable yield, I think it's really important that we then lay out the work plan to take on the 2 projects that seem feasible coming out of the draft water recycling facilities plan. We had that presented to us, and it became clear there are 2 different projects that could each add 300 acre feet per year to this water supply of this basin. I know the LOCSD has done a great job pursuing the state water pipeline. How fast can we get that? This is hopefully within the 50-year vision, right? I hope to be alive to see that that thing, and I will hang on for 50 years because I care about Los Osos that much. But I think we need to know what is realistic in terms of that. And similarly, the increased denitrification of upper aquifer water, which can add 300 or so acre feet to it. I mentioned to Mr. Zimmer last time, I'm working with Public Works on a potential way of disposing of the brine, which is a major issue and a major cost in that I think we might have a slick solution. We're in fact ready. I've heard from Public Works that we're ready now to undertake a feasibility study of disposing of the denitrification brine back into the sewer system, which to me makes all the sense in the world and would cut the cost of that. So I would again add to my request for the details of the pumping redistribution, a serious effort in the next 60 to 90 days to outline these other two things, which are the big ticket items that really will make a difference in the stability of this basin. That said, again, I'm supportive of going forward at 2,000 acre feet for now.
If I appreciate both, your comments. I think both areas, the detailed work plan, the 5-year approach is very conservative in my opinion too.
And I'm not a conservative, it turns out.
But it does allow for more significant measures to take place if needed. It's overcommitting and then find out that there is something that needs to be done. But the revised, optimized pumping scenario that was presented to us, to me, it doesn't seem like it's unrealistic that we would be able to not achieve that within a year or so. I mean, we're gonna work towards that goal. I can give you that commitment, but there may be some unknowns that I'm not sure of sitting here right now. And then that adaptive approach, fully support both of those projects. And really, I look to the county to help facilitate both of those projects. And I think you would have the purveyors on board to help support and move those along.
Those
So
would be game changing.
I agree 100%. Yeah. So, okay. That sounds like two things that we have on our agenda in 2026, Dan.
Get her done.
All right. Any other comments or anything? I think we need to go to a vote at this point.
Maybe a motion?
A motion first and then a vote.
I'll move staff's recommendation.
Go ahead.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes 4-0.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, we're going to close action item 9A, move to action item 9B, the draft Los Osos Basin Management Committee 2026 growth rate recommendation letter.
Thank you, Chair Zimmer. So, and thank you, Spencer, for all your effort on this. So we've got a short staff report for a long letter. So this we wanted to give some background here so people understand this context. I think we've been talking about this quite a bit at previous meetings, so I think most people know. But the county's adoption of the community plan and Coastal Commission's adoption of the community plan, as well as the updated Title 26 Growth Management Ordinance, outlines a process for how the growth rate within the Los Osos Urban Reserve line would progress into the future. And that process includes, tying it to the basin yield metric, which is the current production divided by the current year's sustainable yield at a future date. It also includes a process for how the BMC will have the opportunity to provide recommendations to the county's groundwater sustainability director with respect to the growth rate for the upcoming year. And so we have prepared, with input from the BMC party staff, a draft recommendation letter for the BMC's consideration for approving and submitting to the County Groundwater Sustainability Department. Included in the letter, we have provided quite a bit of information, really an assessment of the current status of the basin based on the best available information that the BMC has at the time, and as well as some background information just to help the new reader sort of understand some of the terminology and findings and numbers, frankly, that include there, as well as the context, again, of where this letter fits within the larger water resource management and land use within Los Osos. And so included in the letter, we have background on the habitat conservation plan, the growth management ordinance, the sustainable yield, the community plan. All these are sort of intertwined initiatives that impact the potential for new development in Los Osos. Included in the letter, we also have an overview of latest basin conditions. And so that includes, the latest sustainable yield estimate, which was just adopted of 2,000 acre feet per year, and a description of that, and what that means for basin management and sustainability, as well as a summary of the latest findings or observations that are part of the annual monitoring report. Now, unfortunately, given the timing this year and maybe subsequent years, our latest annual monitoring report is the 2024 report. So, the information in there is reflective of 2024 conditions, but that is, the latest fully documented because we're still in 2025. But that information is provided, I think, similar to, a comment that you made earlier, Chair Zimmer, is like we're using all available information when we're assessing the health of the basin and making recommendations, both the modeling, component that helps us predict what future conditions may look like. So that's the sustainable yield component. And then the monitoring program, which is our actual physical observations on what's occurring within the basin in real time. And it's really the combination of those two things that really provide, from my perspective, the best picture of the sustainability and the condition of the Los Osos Basin. And then finally included in the letter, we provide an overview of basin initiatives, as those are critical to our ongoing monitoring and management of the basin. And so we have brief updates of the water recycling funding study, the resiliency, the intertie project, as mentioned earlier, an upcoming initiative to update the basin metrics, and then a description of additional modeling efforts that are underway by the county with respect to the transient model, as a way to, just outline that, even though this is our assessment of where we're at based on what we've done, but we're still working on a number of initiatives for the benefit of the Los Osos Basin. And so that's, largely the meat of the letter, but, the real core and the component of the letter is a proposed potential draft recommendation for the BMC's consideration. And the recommendation that's included in the letter currently is that the BMC recommends the County Board of Supervisors adopt a calendar year 2026 growth rate of 0% based on the reduced sustainable yield estimate predicted utilizing the transient groundwater model and the uncertainty of impacts of the growth rate approved for 2025, which was 0.4%, but not yet implemented due to limitations of availability of HCP credits. And then we've additionally just added to the recommendation a following sentence that notwithstanding the foregoing, this recommendation should not be construed as a recommendation with respect to the appropriateness of issuing permits in accordance with the provisions of the county's Title 2016 and Title 19 Retrofit to Build Code of Regulations. to property owners that were provided notice of allocations for development in calendar year 2025. And just a little background there, our understanding is with the adoption of the community plan and the growth management ordinance in late 2024, that established a growth rate of 0.4% for the Los Osos URL in 2025. And letters were sent out to waitlist property owners about the pending availability or the availability of at least allocations under the growth management ordinance for 2025. However, as I mentioned previously, due to, without getting into all the details, an unavailability of HCP credits in 2025, none of that development, to my understanding, was able to move forward. And so subsequent letters were issued that identified that those potential property owners that the deadline for them to express their interest in a potentially available allocation was put on hold to an undetermined date at the time. And so, as I understand it, is that none of that growth occurred in 2025. And so we present this letter for the BMC to provide input and consider authorizing to the groundwater sustainability director or a modified version of this letter, or to provide alternate direction to staff for how to move forward with respect to the procedures that are outlined in the growth management ordinance for how the BMC is to coordinate with the county with respect to growth rate in Los Osos.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions from the board?
How did you get that letter done in the last 9 days or so? That's a long letter. It's very thorough, very detailed. I mean, it, like you said, it covers all the ground.
Well, I guess I would say the definition of working days may differ amongst different parties.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just clarify one aspect of the approach to growth management that the county took and that this committee supported.
Sure.
As Mr. Heimel referenced, the growth rate for 2025 was set at 0.4%. For 26, it was set at 0.6%, at 27, 0.8%, all of those without reference to the basin yield metric because we were trying to build up a 5-year running average. In 2028, the methodology shifts slightly to indicate that the growth rate shall be a maximum of 1%, and what it actually is to be set at is referenced to the 5-year average of the basin yield metric. And so that's the system that's in place now. That's the system that this committee endorsed. And that is part of the basis of the conversation that the county had with the Coastal Commission, excuse me, that ended up getting our LCP certified. I just wanted that on the record to be clear as to what path we had struck.
Yeah. And I understand that approach. I think one of the significant changes along that line is the fact that we implemented the modeling, and it somewhat gave us information that was different than we expected. I thought in the perfect scenario, it would have lined up with our previous model and confirmed the information we were making decisions on. And in this case, it gave us new, what I consider to be better information. And ultimately that really is the factor, I think, from the purveyor and the letter you know, the county has its growth ordinances and controls that aspect of it. And then the purveyors are ultimately looking at the water supply and what the information provides. And really was, you know, my factor in supporting what was in the letter and working through it.
We can discuss those issues in deliberations after public comment.
Okay, sounds good.
If you have a public comment, please come up to the podium. And if you are online, please raise your hand. We will take our public comment in the boardroom first.
Hi, Lynette Brooks. I strongly encourage the committee to vote to send this letter off to the growth or to the county. The whole growth management plan was made under a very high, and as we now know, highly inaccurate sustainable yield. At all the meetings leading up to that, we were told as long as we're not above 80%, we can build. Or as long as we're, and you know, under the old one, we were at 69. That's when that growth management plan was made. It was wrong. Jeff Edwards' math, regardless of Jeff Edwards' math, we are now at 91.5%. Our 1830, 91.5% of 2000, way above where anything in that growth management plan would be allowing us to build. It doesn't matter that we said it would be 0.6%. That was all based on faulty data, as we know now. To keep using data that is old makes no sense. So please vote to send this board off to the county, or the letter off to the county. Thank you very much.
Deborah Howe. I'm chair of the Los Osos Community Advisory Council, and LOCAC is going to get a lot of questions about this. So I want to make sure I understand what this letter and recommendation means. All building within Los Osos now requires the habitat conservation certificates, which are still not available, which means that, as Dan said, none of the 2025 permits were able to go forward. So does the zero mean that what I understand is about 25 permits for 2025 are going to be allowed to move forward, or are they now stopped? And what happens to all the other ones that have been paid? Permits have been paid for, money has been given to the county. Are they, everything's put on hold? I'm going to need some clarification on this. I have a meeting next week, and I know Dan's going to be there, but I don't think he wants to answer that question. So, okay, so you're going to answer that?
I'll speak.
Okay, can you answer it now?
Let's get public comment. I've got a.
Okay, I just want to know because
things. Yeah,
that
we'll get
needs to be answered. Thank you.
Mike Johnston. I talked to you good folks a while ago. I wanted to address what Dan had said about the 0.4% growth for this year and the lack of credits, and the fact that none of that occurred, I think, is what Dan said. If I may respectfully disagree, Dan, had a meeting with the county planning January 3rd, I think it was. And we chatted about minor use permits. And they told me, in just a chat, there were 3 or 4 folks from planning, that indeed minor use permits can take 6 months, and I should really look at that. And I questioned, and I said, well, I'm in batch 1. We're number 6 on the list. And you're telling me I have to have all this done by March 15th. I said, I'm not real good at the calendar, but from January 1 to March 15th is a little less than 6 months. And we went into overdrive trying to get it done. I have in front of me the letter that we got in January, and it talked about the credits. And it said credits will be available for participation by summer. So that's the carrot in front of me, thinking, well, good. I've got time to get that darn minor use permit completed. And you may well know that's not an inexpensive path to travel. In February, we got another letter, February 18th, and that letter said, not credits will be available. They changed the language, a little nuance. They said credits are not expected to be available until summer. Carrot's still out there. So Michael Johnston, my wife Francine, Ernie Kim, the architect, we're spending all the time and effort we can to overcome that hurdle. We're number 6 on the list. My parents bought the lot in 1973 at the Otto family auction, when the whole peninsula and Pasadena Drive was open for bid in 1973. They had plans and permits in the 80s, and that got shut down. I mentioned to you good folks before, that was the last thing my father was telling me. He said, Michael, could you please build a house for our only grandson, our son, on the lot? Pops, I'll do everything I could. I let my guard down. I thought finally, after all these years, we were going to be able to build. Planning says the carrot is still there. Keep working. I can't tell you how many times, I got 5 seconds, that I went to planning and said, please put something in writing. We finally got something in writing on September 25th. And when you say that none of that occurred in 2025, I beg to differ. This family struggled all that time, evidently for naught. Thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick McGibney, I'll first thank the purveyors for your efforts. You have a difficult task to fulfill, and I am sorry for all the ragging I've done on you for doing a poor job. But our history shows it's true. The one task you have is to provide a sustainable water basin for our community, and in your 10 years of management, this hasn't even come close. Most of this I blame the county for. In the majority of the 50 years that I've lived here, the county has known our water basin is in overdraft. As most of the county's basins are, they haven't been good stewards of their basins. But in the 20 years Mr. Gibson has ostensibly represented us, knowing full well our basin was in overdraft, 65 new homes have been constructed with 12 new permits pending for this year. And that's not to mention the countless number of guest houses permitted, further weakening the health of our basin. Mr. Heimel points out the great work that the BMC has done in bettering the monitoring of our basin. But the basin plan points out 40+% of our basin is still unmetered and monitored by estimates only. This we can thank Mr. Gibson for also. So why do I focus on Mr. Gibson? Because the BMC is trying to set a sustainable yield for 2026. You, the purveyors, are lowering the GMO to zero growth, advocating for no new growth that requires more water use until our basin is sustainable, which I suspect Mr. Gibson will object to. If I am wrong, I owe Mr. Gibson a deep and sincere apology, which I will give, but this is also what our history has shown. Now, the sustainability group supports the zero growth GMO, but before you approve the letter, we request that the last paragraph the county attorneys negotiated be removed. It is not your responsibility to protect the county from lawsuits. It is your responsibility to protect our water basin from further overdraft. Any extra water use will only exacerbate the problem, so all pending permits must be denied. Regarding the zero growth rate for the GMO, this must also include guest houses. They are no more than unregulated ADUs with no oversight. They use extra water, which you know doesn't exist. And as Mr. Gibson said regarding the county's approval of the Anastasi development, this could end up in a lawsuit either way, which it did, Our attorney, Babak Nafisi, won that case and the county lost. Guest houses could go that way also, and I hope you're not on the losing end of that issue. Guest houses must be part of the zero growth rate, so include that in your letter also. Thank you.
Richard Margetson, listening to Mr. Gibson's comments about how the growth rate was set last year and it was 1 and you guys compromised down to 0.4 and this year will be 0.6, next year will be 0.6 and 0.8. Just a little simple math equation to consider. You just approved a 16% reduction in the sustainable yield. Mr. Gibson would like you to raise the growth rate 50% from 0.4 to 0.6. I'll just leave you with that.
All right, there's no further public comment in the boardroom, so we will go to online. Becky McFarland, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate the letter and setting the growth rate at 0%. My only recommendation is that it add guest houses, as the speaker before me had said. Please. Also, old permits should not be able to move forward because, as another speaker said, the CCC's decision at that ridiculous meeting where they were basing it on bad data presented by the county and presented to them in ex parte meetings that we didn't get to even see any minutes from. I'll just state again, I am not against people building their dream houses. Everybody wants to do that, but we must have the water to do so. And I understand, I mean, I feel terrible for the man who is talking about trying to get a house built. It's sad and it's understandably maddening and expensive for people who were falsely led to believe that our basin is sustainable for more building, let alone the existing population. The entire board must approve the 0% growth, and the county needs to really show that they do care about Los Osos because they have not shown that. We all know that. We've been here a long time. For myself, it's been 40 years. Thank you.
All right, Jeff Edwards, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Thank you again. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I believe it was the chair that raised the question of to what extent the transient model is in alignment with the steady state model. And the idea that they're aligned at all is almost laughable. The appearance is that they're 180 degrees apart. And yes, they've been peer reviewed, but this is a basin that's been studied for over 50 years. Are all these guys wrong that have looked at it before? All these analyses? I'm struggling with this. Are we no longer interested, by way of example, are we no longer interested in the creek compartment as a zone for extractions? I'm not understanding fully this question about at Bay Oaks, for example, inducing seawater intrusion. So with that said, I'd like to refer to the letter, and one of the baseline suggestions for reducing the sustainable yield is the uncertainty of impacts associated with growth. I spoke of this before. Growth, any impacts, they would be positive. The ratio is 2 to 1. That is conserved water to demand. Development, residential development will save water. That's inherent in the program. And that's not reflected very well in this letter, and it should be. A whole paragraph should be dedicated to Title 19. And it's, for example, it's success. There's data on that that could be incorporated into this letter. So in addition to strengthening that paragraph, I would also suggest that you strengthen the intertie paragraph. There's discussion about the pipeline itself, but there's no mention of the water that needs to be acquired to put in the pipeline, and that's specifically Table A water, Table A state project water. And I think we need to begin that effort immediately. And we'll need the supervisor's help on that. I would strengthen that paragraph in that regard. And 200 acre feet or 300 acre feet, I think we are set up for at least 600 acre feet of state water. And I think it would be worthwhile to incorporate that. Additionally, there's all this talk about stormwater capture and taking treated effluent, discharging in the creek. We need to include in the options to increase the safe yield, among other items, the option of inflatable dam at Los Osos Creek to deploy seasonally during periods of heavy precipitation. We know there is a connection between the creek bed south of the bridge and zones D and or E, a little unclear on that, but that's a low cost, low tech, easy to do stormwater capture naturally that could add a couple 100 acre feet to the safe yield. That should be modeled.
Hey, Jeff, your time's up. You're going to need to wrap it up.
I'd be happy to. I would strengthen the letter incorporating the items I suggested. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bavik Nafisi, you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to address a few different points in kind of rapid fire. When Mr. Heimel talked about that last paragraph of the recommended letter, I didn't really understand from that discussion, why is it that the Basin Committee is not making a recommendation with respect to all permits, including the permit applications in process right now. The Basin Planning Commission Committee's discretion and responsibility is to basically do everything it needs to manage the basin for the benefit of all users. So it doesn't make sense to me that they're punting on this. I'm very sympathetic to the people who received the letter from the county saying that they're now like actually in that line. That notwithstanding, as things stand today, neither the county nor the Coastal Commission could make a necessary finding with respect to availability of water. No matter what the GMO said in 2025 and whatever the letter this county sent, the facts as they exist today do not allow the county or anybody else to make that finding. So I think it's kind of a waste of everybody's time to kind of pretend like the zero growth rate is not there. I also want to kind of caution everyone that although like the adoption of the Basin Plan itself was not subject to CEQA, all of these various plans, like the ones Mr. Edwards has been talking about, the optimization, this very murky concept that I still don't have any details on, all these plans will have to be vetted, and then they're subject to CEQA. So it's not, I say this because in the future, whatever projects are coming down, whether they rely on the basin for groundwater or whether they're part of this optimization plan, rotating wells, digging new wells, whatever it is, these all have to be vetted. It's not that, they just can't be implemented because a bunch of folks in this committee think it's a good idea for, dealing, increasing the sustainable yield. I also want to kind of point out that we need to see the growth optimization plan in detail and let that really work through a public process itself. And I'm not sure how the committee can really commit to this 2000 FY sustainable yield without, sort of showing the math here. Maybe I'm missing something and it can be clarified. But I congratulate you for moving in the right direction. But I think that there's still a lot of issues to be resolved. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, there's no further public comment in the boardroom or online, so I'll bring it back to the board.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to the board.
Mr. Chairman, if I might. First, let me just say that consistent with other instances where this committee has undertaken a discussion to make a recommendation to the county, I will be abstaining from the final vote. But with your indulgence, Mr. Chair, I might offer you some perspective as you consider what recommendation you might want to make to us. My first observation is that recommending 0% growth is not consistent with the action we just took in the item before of establishing the safe yield at 2,000 acre feet per year. And we went through that, a very careful discussion of that as regards adaptive management and the vision under which that was in. And I think the technical basis of that is solid. The other thing I would note, we hear it from time to time in public comment, and it's simply not correct, that should production on a given year exceed the 80% or the basin yield metric of 80, which is 80% of basin, that does not indicate that the basin is in overdraft. That basin yield metric target at 80% is a matter of prudent management of the basin. And we've just seen, as we've rolled out the transient model, the wisdom of doing that. It was really good. We had that buffer there because we used up a chunk of that buffer. But importantly, we didn't use all of that. At the current average production of 1,830 acre feet per year, the basin yield metric has gone up to 91.5, as one of our commenters noted. And again, that number on the average, again, this is the average, which is part of the assumptions on modeling here. That average at 91.5 indicates that the basin is not in overdraft. And it does depend on us suitably distributing the water, and we have a plan to do that. What I would note for the committee is that when the Coastal Commission considered the county's local coastal program and our demonstration of whether there was adequate water to sustain the growth at the rates that we put forward, their concern was, are we overdrafting the basin or not? They were explicitly not interested in what our management targets were. It was simply a matter of, on average, are you using more water than the basin can sustain? And clearly, again, with the decision we just took in the last item, that we're not. And so let me remind the committee that the methodology of setting a safe yield for the basin depends on our newly established transient model. Again, my commentary regarding its uncertainty, its sensitivity to whether we produce this much or that much water stands. That hasn't been quantified yet. We're hopeful that that is going to be done in the very near future. And so, but the model has been the basis upon which we have decided to set a sustainable yield of 2,000 acre feet. And I think it's only logical that we then assess the impacts of growth by using the model. And the point that I'd like to make here, let me just take as an example, our current year's growth rate was set at 0.4%. We didn't come close to that. In fact, we won't probably this year will not approve a permit. There are those in process, and I'll talk to that in just a second. We're certainly set to move the growth rate up to 0.6 next year and 0.8 the year after, independent of what the Basin yield metric said. But let me just concentrate on 0.4 for the current time. If we had in fact approved all 25 units under a 0.4% growth rate, that would have added 3.6 acre feet per year to the demand of the basin. And that number comes out of the Medallis report that was part of reviewing and establishing the retrofit to build ordinance. They went through and analyzed water consumption in the kind of units that we are approving, and 25 units would be 3.6 acre feet per year. Given what we see in the transient model and the nature of its calibration, which is not great on chloride, I think it's easy to see that whether we pump 1,830 or 1,833.6 acre feet is not going to show up. That is an insignificant, it is a negligible amount. And that 3.6 assumes that none of the use of the new units was offset by the Title 19 retrofit to build. I'd say on the other side of that, that should we have indeed achieved a 2-to-1 offset, we wouldn't see a savings of 3.5 acre feet per year in the model. It just is a trivial amount of water. It is an insignificant amount of water relevant to the uncertainties in modeling and relative to the 50-year time horizon that we would be looking at. Let me take a slightly more extreme example that relates to the methodology that we used to establish the safe yield of 2000. Let's suppose, just as a thought experiment, that we continued for 5 years at a 0.4% growth rate. And let's assume that every year we approved and saw built every one of the 25 units that would be allowed under that. At the end of those 5 years, we would have added 18 acre feet per year to the demand coming out of the basin, 5 times 3.6 acre feet per year. That's less than 1% of the current average demand of the basin. And again, I would submit that, especially looking out over a 50-year time frame with no, and again, assuming no offset of the water use under Title 19, that 1% increase would not be visible. So were we to, when I said I liked the conceptual framework that we used to reset the safe yield at 2000, I think there's a parallel here. Basically, what we're saying is that in terms of redistributing pumping, we're allowing the water purveyors to do business as usual for up to 5 years. That assumption is nothing happens in 5 years. And then, having established that in 5 years, the remaining 45 of the run is safe at 2,000 acre feet. I would submit that if we allowed business as usual for 5 years of 0.4% growth, similarly, we would the remaining time in the 50-year time frame that is the very definition of how we get to sustainable yield, that 1% addition of 18 acre feet per year would not be visible. So overall, the question of whether 0.4% growth is significant, I think gets answered definitively in that it's not. It is further, to put that further in, to scale that further, let's consider what the actions of the purveyors are moving forward in terms of the water supply. First of all, the redistribution of pumping gains 170 acre feet of water per year. The extra denitrification of upper aquifer water would gain 300 acre feet per year. And the intertie to the state water project would gain another 300 acre feet per year. So if we look at 1 year of 0.4% growth, we are looking at something that is that two major projects that seem eminently feasible are almost 100 times greater in magnitude to the benefit of the basin than this 3% acre, 3.6 acre feet per year. So that's the technical argument that I think does not support 0% as a growth rate. And I believe truly that the Coastal Commission, based on its previous analysis of our water, would agree. And again, this is the extreme case of no offset with Title 19. There's another component to this that's different, and it was represented in the public testimony, Ms. Howe and Mr. Johnson, in that consistency in public policy and practice does have an important place. The county undertook an extensive amount of development, an extensive amount of staff work to develop the amendments to the local coastal program, to go through the process of analyzing the water situation, and to put into place the habitat conservation plan that is a 25-year effort to do significant environmental protections as an offset for what development will go in. Getting those things up, and specifically the HCP, getting that up and running has required a significant impact of to the county staff. We actually hired, I think, a half-time individual to manage that. And so from a good governance standpoint, having set a growth rate of 0.4%, not seeing that fully subscribed, and then all of a sudden deciding to go to 0% doesn't make for good governance. And if we're bopping around year by year, well, this year we might do this and this year we might do that. I think, again, the technical analysis here suggests that we could go for 5 years at 0.4% and not create any noticeable effect on the overall condition of this basin. So what I'm hoping for in these comments is to bring my colleagues on this committee along and ask that the recommendation not be 0%. I think there are a number of important issues that you could urge the county to consider. I think you could educate my colleagues and the process by which we're going to decide later this year what the growth rate would be. I don't see it being 0% as the recommendation coming for our staff. And I would hope that we could get on the same page with that, with a full explication of those issues that you think are important for us to consider. So with that, I'll leave you to your deliberations on that. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, and we'll see how it goes from there.
Thank you for that input. I think you brought some good information before us to consider. You know, my thought on some of this is that, you know, we have some of what you mentioned about the projects and the moving forward. You know, we talked about that in our sustainable yield, that those are future projects, but right now we're making a decision based on conditions. And I reflect back to, you know, if we had the information before us today, would we make this decision we made in setting the growth? You know, would the county have gone through the same measures and made the same recommendation with the information that we have before us today? And so I know it is not with the best for the county to hear this kind of information, and it's not in line with the objectives and all the hard work that was put forward. from my perspective as a water purveyor, I have to look at the facts before me and look at what are those facts telling us? And I reflect back to the model, the information of the model, our monitoring report results, and trying to make the best decision I can. I'll just stop right there, see if there's any other comments from towards Supervisor Gibson's comments.
Well, I would just like to comment that there's another aspect to good governance, and that is, what is the value in raising hopes and expectations and stacking up a waiting list when you haven't been able to process this year's allocation? Not one. So is it fair to get the community stirred? And I understand that this 1 year's allocation and even a couple years wouldn't be a significant number in terms of what we pump. And I guess that's the reason that I'm willing to say the people who in good faith entered the process last year, I don't really want to pull the rug out from under those people, but I do not want the expectation that this community can support growth quite yet. I'm just not quite sure we're there.
So my comments are kind of going back to what Supervisor Gibson had said about the number 2000. And I think it's been acknowledged probably by even some of us on the board that we picked the number 2000 with concessions. And so we've already determined this year through the transient model that Cleith Harris geologists put together that 1830 is not sustainable. So I understand we're picking a sustainable yield and our target is 80% of that. However, what we are pumping today is not sustainable, and that means seawater is intruding further every time we do that, every year we do that. And so I think that acknowledgement is pretty critical here. So while I understand, and the other thing, I appreciate the position that Supervisor Gibson has because he's representing both the county and he's representing the BMC here. But I think we also need to remember that I think the primary group that he's representing here are the ag users and the community users. And those are, having a higher sustainable yield, I don't know where in that mix that's required, but at the end of the day, I don't think our sustainable yield was intended to drive growth, but here we are. And so I think if we're going to use it to manage the basin in that way, or manage, growth in that way, that we need to be very careful with how we apply that. The other thing I want to mention, so with regard to the science and the, I guess, how much we're going to rely on it. In our stipulated judgment, it says about the using the model that a margin of error included in the model is acceptable. So we accept that our model is not perfect, but that means in both the positive and the negative direction. And so that means if we're picking a sustainable yield of 2000 that may be too high or not too high, we have to have that buffer. We have to make sure that the basin is protected. And so I think a 0% growth is the right approach for this year, because doing that ensures that we can get our feet back under us after the transient model is now out and we're using that data, not to mention the fact that we'll plug new data into it every year for the next, going forward every year. And so it may start giving us different information as we put these projects into place. And the last thing I just want to mention is, this transient model has been peer reviewed extensively, and the final comment of the summary that came out of the Hansen memo that went to the county and we were given a couple weeks ago, it does say among the findings are that if the current pumping and recharge conditions continue, seawater intrusion will likely persist. And while that's not a definite term, it is pretty clear that what they think is that our model is sufficient to predict that if we do what we're doing today, seawater intrusion will persist.
Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to respond to any of those unless you'd like to get in on the conversation here.
No, you're welcome to respond.
So
please.
that is what the one of the peer reviews said, including the one water. But the change here is that in adopting this 2,000 acre, so first of all, this committee adopted 2,000 acre feet per year as its sustainable yield, factoring in all the uncertainties and all the issues. I don't see that it is on concession, but I see that is as the result of running a model which pumps 1,830 acre feet per year for 5 years under the current configuration, and then switches it to 1,830 feet per year under a redistributed condition. And what the modeling showed was that if we change to that condition, seawater intrusion will not continue. Seawater intrusion will not cross the line that we have set. So it's not that we're continuing today what we do tomorrow. That change is in the essence of coming up with the 2,000 acre feet. And if we could have purveyors change their pumping distribution tomorrow, we could actually have 2,020 acre feet, although that 20 acre feet plus or minus, I don't think is significant one way or another. And as to the peer review, again, I won't repeat all the comments I've made over several last meetings, but I will let you know that Todd Groundwater is just about finalized on a memo that we will absolutely get to all members of the BMC, which confirms that adding 3.6 acre feet of draft per year is not going to be seen, is not going to be, there's not going to be a scientific basis given the uncertainty in the model for declaring that will make the basin unsustainable. So again, I just want to make sure that those items are here, that this board, again, this committee has adopted 2,000 acre feet per year as the sustainable yield, and the analysis of the county as regards future decisions based on growth is going to be based on the adoption of that number in the manner that I described in my earlier comments. And that's I think all I need to say at this point.
Yeah, I think just going back to the 2,000 acre feet that, we have that 5 year built in to make the changes in our system. I mean, we've agreed to do that quicker, but that's how we get to the 2,000. So today, we're faced with making this decision based on current conditions. The sustainable yield is another factor that we're going to try to achieve by making changes in addition to implementing these projects that you mentioned about the additional waters coming in and water available. I think all of that is work that needs to be done, but building in this factor that the growth rate today, and we need to make that decision based on current conditions is the point I'm trying to make.
I don't know how we can not send the letter, given that we've just adopted a sustainable yield of 2,000 acre feet a year. 80% of that is 1,600 acre feet. We're pumping 1,830 on average.
I'll just add the other point that with regard to the sustainable yield, it is only the purveyors that are impacted. So I think that this is a commitment between the purveyors that we need to not just conserve, which, I think we've all worked really hard on getting our customers to do, but we have to look to the future too. And, how are we going to maintain our water supplies for current and then eventually future demand? I think that's a critical question. And when it comes to sustainable yield, we have a shrinking pool that we've acknowledged here and that I guess we're okay with. So that doesn't, fortunately for the ag users, that doesn't impact them, but it does impact us and how we manage our water supplies.
So I recommend, or I would like to move that we authorize the submission of the committee's growth rate recommendation letter to the county as drafted.
I will second that.
Maybe we should do a roll call. So Director Cesena,
Yes.
Director Gibson,
Abstain.
Director Reinecke,
Yes.
Chair Zimmer.
Yes.
Okay. I think motion passes 3-0 with one abstention.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for the deliberation and input. We'll go ahead and close action item 9B. We'll move to our last item, adjournment. Okay. Hey, public comment?
Not an adjournment. No.